that up to 50 billion IoT sensors will be active in 2020, leading Victor Meyer of Foreign Affairs to predict the amount of digitalized personal data will double every 3 years, while the International Data Group writes that there will be a 13% increase in unique and unseen data by 2020 collected by new technologies. Unfortunately, as Matthew Olson of Harvard explains, these sensors are the prime mechanisms for mass surveillance, as they allow governments to conjoin data from various sources to create a singularity of information that is more personal and more dangerous than the sum of its parts. The way governments access our data is by exploiting vulnerabilities. As Peter Denning of the Naval Postgraduate School explains, IoT companies are under tremendous pressure to get their products to the market because if they spend too much time developing, market share disappears, and competitors beat them to the punch. Corporations therefore minimize the amount of time that they spend fixing defects and securitizing, which is why Denning finds that companies release technology despite being aware of critical vulnerabilities 80% of the time. This emboldens administrations to access our personal information. As Olson writes, over the last few years, the increased availability of encryption has slowed surveillance efforts to a halt. However, this effect is quickly being reversed by the Internet of Things, which is creating new and unencrypted channels of communication faster than we can measure. Even if IoT devices were to be protected, governments would simply force companies to build backdoors into products through either monetary incentive or compulsory legislation. Tim Sparapani of Forbes writes that countries like the United States, China, and Russia pursue backdoors as government surveillance capacities increase at an alarming rate. IoT-based surveillance is more intrusive for two reasons. First, compromising other devices. Unlike conventional technology, the IoT operates on machine-to-machine communication, where each sensor on a network transmits data to every other unit. This allows officials to infiltrate one device and gather data from others, unlike conventional computers. Indeed, a 2015 HP Enterprise report finds that as IoT adoption expands, security concerns exponentially multiply as a single intrusion can act as a gateway to 60 others. Second, by raising the threshold for what can be watched. Conventional surveillance is limited to the digital world, specifically information that people decide to disclose online. In contrast, the IoT bridges technology into the physical world, as Neil Richards of the Harvard Law Review writes that over the next 15 years, the Internet of Things will be increasingly built into our appliances, homes, and infrastructure, subjecting previously unobservable activity to close surveillance. Bruce Schneier of The Guardian concludes, the Internet of Things will give governments and corporations that follow our every move something that they did not yet have: eyes and ears. The impact is structural discrimination. Deepak Kumar of Rutgers University writes that any expansion of the surveillance state strengthens institutions of racism, as governments tend to focus on minorities due to aggregates of poverty and crime and entrenched stereotypes. For example, the ACLU quantifies that black citizens are 2.5 times more likely to be watched than their non-black counterparts. Malkia Cyril of the Progressive Institute furthers that because the widest net is cast over the black population, African Americans are exponentially more likely to end up in prison and have fundamentally become intertwined with perceptions of criminality. This effect certainly isn't limited to the United States, as Gordon Goldstein of the Wall Street Journal writes, overtly racist governments like Saudi Arabia, Iran, China, and India have all designed tactics to manipulate the Internet of Things for control. Michael Minkenberg of Georgetown University furthers, autocratic regimes in Eastern Europe and Central Asia have historically used surveillance as a tool to control and oppress ethnic minorities. Until this trend is overturned, MIT's Noam Chomsky writes, quote, governments will use whatever technology is available to them to combat their primary enemy, their own population. Far from representative, nations only serve segments of the population that are dominant, affluent, and of the same color. As a result, Catherine Beckett of the University of Washington argues, the most unsurprising consequence of an intensifying surveillance state is the burgeoning number of minorities and dissenters suppressed by their government. Stephen Marshall of the Johns Hopkins University concludes with the impact that new forms of everyday surveillance ensure the growth of a statistical rhetoric of oppression that operates as a proxy for the discourse on the subordination of minorities all over the world. In order to stop this structural oppression, we urge you to negate.
Ready for crossfire?
Yeah.
Is it okay if I read your case during crossfire?
Didn't you hear it last round?
Yeah, I just want to make sure.
Yo, what's the point of the constructive speech? You're just gonna...
Don't ask the point. Say yes or no.
Yeah, just no. It's gonna make his rebuttal better.
Can you even say no? I don't think you can say no.
You're actually giving it to him?
Yeah, I don't think you can say no. It's like calling for a card.
Is this like not allowed?
I prefer you give it to him.
I mean, I'm not against it, he is.
Yeah. I don't actually
I just want to make sure one
if
thing.
If you want us to show it to him, I'm fine.
Okay.
I mean, like, don't you want to show it to him? You don't want to
My Wi-Fi's on.
Yeah,
like,
Dude,
you want to be like,
you think I'm going to report you to
I
town for
understand.
that Wi-Fi?
Yeah, what is this? Like, no.
Fine, can we read your case?
you can, but I don't have anything to give it to you.
I don't want it.
Okay, so if you have our kiss, can we have your rebuttal after you?
All right.
Okay.
Go
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So what do all phones, laptops, and is present on almost every single street corner?
What?
What is in my laptop, in your phone, in every single street corner?
What do you want me to say?
What I was getting at was microphones and cameras.
Sure.
Okay, so then you only access a marginal increase at best in the terms of surveillance. Because I always have my phone on me, right? Most people already have my phone on me. I already asked the question. This is just like us talking about it. This is
I'm not really doing much
not a
talking.
cross-questioning.
I mean, you have to ask one. I'm going to ask you a question, sure. So
wait,
the hallmark
can you
of...
comment on what I just said?
No, I'm not going to. So
why not?
I'm only here so I don't have to be fined, okay? So let's talk about your agricultural argument, right? You say that...
I'd rather talk about this.
No, but I don't want to.
But I don't want to talk
David,
about that then.
Okay, fine. You got one, so I'm going to get a question now.
But
So
can we just talk about it first before we
afterwards,
go on?
Afterwards.
Well, that
So
doesn't make any sense. It's like discombobulated.
if you had not
It's like a
said
big
all of
barrier.
this, then we could have had that question.
But
and
you
we
said
could be,
all of it. I asked you to answer it, and then you went on this tangent. Like,
I'm just going to ask a question. I don't care if you answer or
Alright,
not,
sure,
right?
sure.
So the hallmark of agricultural sensors is that they're dirt cheap, right?
Sure.
So it'd be pretty reasonable that we could probably put one on all the plants and everything because, you know, we can get very specific and precise information about every acre of land.
Wait, what are you saying?
Well, the argument that you're making is that these sensors are really good because we place them all over the place.
Yes.
They're really cheap, so we can
Yeah.
put them on a bunch of acres, right? The
Sure.
McKinsey evidence or whatever evidence you read from VentureBeat, David Evans says they're like
Okay.
15, 25 cents. So if there's hundreds of
never
acres
read
on a farm,
it.
okay, well,
Okay, sure.
then I'm gonna read it now.
Okay,
right?
great.
They're 25, 15 cents.
Okay.
So for small farmers that make $1.25 a day in the
Yes.
developing world, isn't 25 cents per acre, considering that they probably
Not-
have lots of acres, going
Not
to take
when
a
they
large
make-
chunk of their income
Not
out?
when every 25-cent investment makes them a ton
Sure.
more money.
So
by
they need to take out
increasing yield
loans,
by
is what you're
70%. No, because they don't need to use as much food. They don't need to use
Right,
as
but
much
the
land
initial
because
cost-
there's a 70% increase in yield.
Okay,
Now,
but
can we get back to my question?
But the initial cost needs to be overcome for them to purchase, right?
You said they make $1.25 a day. That means they can buy
So
5
they're-
cents a
yeah.
day. Like, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
All right. Yeah. Okay, so when we talk about computers, right? So do you what other than like a marginal increase in all of your impacts do you access?
So the IDC evidence that we read says that there's going to be a 13% increase in unique data that we weren't able to get previously.
Okay, but
right?
is that data useful, right? Like,
Okay.
why does it matter if the
Let's-
government
let's-
knows that I like black coffee?
Let's say a couple things, right? First of all, phones and computers, you can turn those off, right? But the appliances in your home, generally, you don't think to turn them off.
Well, the
Even
problem,
if you do,
wait,
there are a
the
lot of
problem
things
here,
regarding
the
consent
problem
where
is the
for
same
example-
warrant. You get the same warrant here, right? Because if anyone in the room has a phone, then that means the NSA can hear me, just like if there's an Internet of Things device in the room, they can hear me.
Sure,
It's the same
sure,
logic. So every single person in the world would have to turn off their phone and shut off all the security cameras
Just
that
every
exist
single
on the
person
street.
in a room. Yeah,
What?
Maybe every single
So
person.
everyone in the
That's
room
not my
would have to-
argument, right?
wait,
I was gonna
it
get to that, right?
Okay.
So the other two things that we would say are that one, the PEP evidence that Keisha is going to read, I guess I can read it now,
Says
says
what?
that a lot of the anti-discrimination laws that affect the gathering of data through your computer
Mhm.
don't apply to the IoT because it's an unregulated industry. The second thing that I
So
would
then
say
it would just be
is that-
regulated, right? Like,
yeah, you need to
logically.
be able to fiat that, considering that, for example, the Trump
Well, why
presidency is
wouldn't
very pro-surveillance. They probably
Okay.
won't make new laws. But even then, I would also argue that it's
But
probably
we're not just talking
like
about the
a
United States,
marginal
right? We're talking about the world.
Sure. It's a, yeah.
Just say it so that. Yeah.
Okay, it's gonna go crossfire, then down their case.
Okay, where are you going to flow crossfire?
Overview.
Alright, so you don't have a crossfire
Actually,
sheet?
the first part of the crossfire will be an overview. The second part will be lining on our case that they've yet to respond to.
There's gotta be a good record.
No, I'm not. I'm gonna talk about the whole thing about the sensors. Just flow them as overviews. I really don't care. Yeah, I'll sign post. Okay, everybody.
I don't think that's
Fine, go ahead.
Everyone ready? Okay. First, we can all agree that computers are good. The fundamental problem is they don't discern the difference between the IoT expansion and the expansion of computer devices, which is a big problem for them when computers can surveil everything they say either way. There's no marginal difference, therefore no uniqueness. But second of all, let's get to Crossfire where they talk about the fact that we can put a sensor in every single plant and it would be too expensive. The first big problem is the Max fundamentally misunderstands how these sensors work. You don't need a rainfall sensor in every single crop. Like if you have one acre away, the rainfall is the same. 3 acres away, the minerals in the dirt are also the same. You don't need to buy like 3,000 of these sensors to monitor your crops. It's very cheap to monitor them. With that in mind, let's go down their case. On their first contention and only contention, their first link is more data. They say that governments intrude when you have less cybersecurity. This is fundamentally false. Governments don't hack into our devices. They get backdoors into our devices. But this is problematic for them because the Reason Foundation find that corporations are now banding together because they don't want massive data scandals from the IoT, which is why the vast majority of the big players in terms of developing IoT, IBM, Intel, Google, have all already agreed they will not let corporations access this data, which is problematic for them because corporations don't want to have a profit loss and therefore will not let the government access it. Second of all, even assuming they're right about the government hacking into devices, the security market for the IoT is just as big as the IoT market itself. That's why we see a twofold increase in the next 4 years for cybersecurity spending, which is in fact expected to increase even more in the following years, which means this problem won't be a big issue either. But second, they give you two reasons why the IoT is uniquely insecure. The first of which is machine-to-machine learning. They don't understand what this means. They're saying you can jump from one device to another. That's how current phones and computers work too, which is why one hack on one computer can shut down millions of devices at once. We hear about this all the time in the news. But second of all, they talk about new types of surveillance. The data, like David tells you in Crossfire, is useless. If the government can hack into my iCoffee machine, they now know I like black coffee and I like it at 8 a.m. This is completely useless data. It really does not matter. And also, why does my toaster have eyes and ears? This also doesn't make any sense to me. Like, that's what they're saying. Let's go to their impact on inequality. So first of all, they're saying that you can now monitor anything, which is problematic for them because of cell phones, right? Like the first thing I buy for my phone, for my home, is not my iRefrigerator, it is my cell phone. That's the first application or first appliance that anybody's going to buy, which is problematic for them because the Washington Post finds the NSA can tap into almost 100% of phone conversations in the status quo. With a cell phone, they can track where you are, what you're saying to other people. Oh, it's almost a 100% intrusion on privacy, which really means all their impacts should have already manifested, but none of them have, which is problematic for them because in the United States, the type of discrimination, according to them, is literally not legal, and second of all, not happening even in the ideas where there are legal loopholes. But second of all, monitoring more means finding less due to metadata, because there's so much audio and video that you have to sift through, even if every single device is equipped with these, that you literally would never find anything. It's such an overload of data that any intelligent agency would never be able to find anything important, right? Like, just because everybody's, like, in these authoritarian oppressive regimes that they're talking about where people could actually be punished for these issues, everybody is saying things dissent against the government all the time. You can't arrest everybody. This is why their own evidence says that even though black people are surveilled 2.5 times more than white people, nothing has occurred as a result. They're being surveilled more, not arrested more. But third of all, the argument logically doesn't make any sense because we can currently discern age, race, and sex in the status quo. Carnegie Mellon finds that 87% of people can have their race, sex, and age discerned by public information that is completely available on the internet, which means if this discrimination is so bad, it should already be occurring. But let's talk about the more important issue, which is inequality aside from discrimination. The IoT reduces the economic inequality, which is the crux of the issue in two ways. First of all, in agriculture, we give small farmers the edge. But second of all, in economics, Stanford finds that from our case tells us one fundamental truth. The only way to transition from developing to developed is industrialization, innovation, and growth, which is why they conclude that growth coincides with inequality reductions. Each 1% increase in growth reduces inequality by nearly 1%. This is the crux of the round, right? Like, not authoritarian regimes arresting people, because most people are disadvantaged because they are too poor and can't escape poverty, and that's the only side, we are the only side impacting to this. Briefly, in Crossfire, they talk about how there's going to be laws that are regulating, and I'm sure they're going to bring something to rebuttal, how there's going to be legal loopholes that allow for discrimination. But their own source, Pepin of View, Colorado, finds that even though these laws don't exist right now, they will exist as soon as the impacts from racism exist, because everybody understands the IoT can be used to surveil in this way, and therefore governments are eventually going to adopt these laws. And finally, quick scope analysis. For every one country that wants to use the IoT for bad, 10 more want to use it to better the lives of their citizens. There's only 30 authoritarian governments in the world, and the vast majority of them want to help their citizens with IoT technology. So vote for the affirmative.
I know this might sound really dumb, but there's a card that says that like accessing phones and computers gives access to everything else.
No, it's just an anecdote.
Okay.
How long was that?
A minute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, what's
Okay.
that? For sure. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's like another 5 seconds. Maybe a little more than that.
It's fine. It's fine. Give me 9 left.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'm gonna first front line. So your case? Yeah. And then speech.
Come on.
Yeah, and then an overview, or 2 overviews, and then down their case. But on their case, I'm going to start on their second contention and then go to their first contention.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. Alright. On our first contention, the first thing he says is that governments get backdoors, but corporations are like banding against them. But this is non-responsive to this fair plenty evidence that says that countries like the U.S., China, and Russia are pursuing mandatory backdoors on corporations. They can't just choose not to get them. But second of all, governments themselves are getting backdoors on crypto keys. So even if corporations band together, they can't stop the governments. But now then they say that the cybersecurity will get better. But Robert Vanderbilt and Gardner writes in 2016 that only 10% of security funding is going into IoT-specific cybersecurity funding. So they're not really getting much of an increase in security funding. But then they say that the NSA can tap into phones right now. First of all, phones can be tapped into, but that's only when people are making calls. But second of all, they do not respond to the Richards evidence that says that over the next 15 years, the Internet of Things will increasingly be built into our appliances, homes, and infrastructure, subjecting previously unobservable activity to close scrutiny. We will create a new surveillance state that is just not specific to phones. And with that being said, let's go to the overview. First of all, racism comes first. Albert Memmi writes that we must reject every instance of racism. No life is worth living if some lives are valued over others. They never contest this weighing. Institutional racism is a systemic impact. It happens every second of every day. But second on the overview, this is what Max alluded to in cross-sex. It doesn't go anywhere on the flow yet, but Scott Pepin of the University of Colorado writes in 2015 that the kind of discrimination the IoT brings cannot be controlled by anti-discrimination laws. Now go to their contention too. First on agriculture, first take out their link because Roger Boyd of NYU writes in 2013 that the industrial agricultural practices employed by farmers today are already locked in and too hegemonic to have many fundamental changes to the system. Even if data collection magically works, the collected data will never change or improve ongoing practices. But second, take out their impact because Eric Gimenez of the Huffington Post writes in 2012 the world already produces 1.5 times enough food to feed everyone on the planet. But third, terminally defend the link because Amy Peachy of CBS writes in 2016 that the IoT would push 7.1 million people into unemployment and make administrative jobs obsolete. Michael Chui of McKinsey furthers in 2016 that automation driven by the IoT would ultimately push out 45% of jobs globally. Adam Taggart of Pre-Peak Prosperity concludes in 2016 that jobs displaced by technology will never come back. But second on the economy, first, cybersecurity is a prerequisite to their impacts for 2 reasons. A is reactionary policies. Gross tells you that cyber threats will make the government reactively limit the advancement of new technologies. Stewart furthers that this creates a cost burden on firms, stifling innovation. But B is investor confidence. Andrew Mueller of Business Insider explains in 2016 that in order for the IoT to take off, manufacturers first need to address concerns regarding security and privacy, as 90% of enterprises lack confidence in the technology. The FTC explains in 2015 that perceived risk to privacy and security would undermine the investor confidence necessary for technologies to meet their full potential and result in less widespread adoption in the future. But second, terminally defend the link. That's the same response. But second, Rowling writes in 2015 that global warming will push an additional 100 million people into poverty and destroy the world economy, which is heavily dependent on climate stability. This will make sense right after I terminally defend emissions. But now, the McKinsey evidence said that like $4.4 trillion will be like gained by 2025. They need to access innovation for those impacts to happen by 2025. Then they talk about an increase in GDP, but Econ Link quantifies that for every 1% increase in unemployment, GDP decreases by 4% from its potential. But now on the environment. First, terminally defend the link because Richard Martin of MIT Technology Review writes in 2016 that the IoT would prolong the life of dying coal plants. We're currently in the middle of a transition from coal to natural gas. However, the advent of the IoT would stifle that transition by improving the performance of aging coal plants, encouraging utility companies to keep them running rather than shutting them down. He concludes that net long-term emissions will go up. But second, terminally defend the link because Jim Smith of Wired writes in 2014 that IoT initiatives will undeniably lead to an increase in the number of data centers. It's harmful because Ben Lavely of Data Center Knowledge writes in 2014, increased data center use will increase carbon dioxide emissions. The NRDC predicts a 53% increase in emissions over the next 7 years because of data centers. But third, terminally defend the link because Richard Prime of Information Age writes in 2014 that IoT fixtures will reduce the cost of energy emissions by 62%. This would induce cost to our farmers to emit more, devastating the environment. This drives a hole into their link chain because in a meta-analysis of 20 different studies, Adam Rose of the University of Southern California verifies that an increase in fuel efficiency stimulates the demand for energy, offsetting the initial greenhouse gas reductions and increases CO2 emissions by 20%. Now go to their first contention really quick. First, Alex Wright of Newsweek writes in 2016 that global warming would inevitably lead to more earthquakes and volcano eruptions because seismic faults are very sensitive to small pressure changes brought about by changes in the climate. We control the internal links to earthquakes and eruptions happening in the first place. You have to go for both arguments now. But second, Denning from our case tells you that 80% of IoT devices are released with known vulnerabilities because companies are more interested in pushing products to the market while creating secure devices. This is especially harmful because communities using early response systems will grow dependent on them. If they're compromised during a natural disaster, there'll be no warning system in place. 80% is too high a number to predicate lives on it. Thus, we strongly urge you vote to decline. I just did find and replace.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Okay. So our first question, is everybody ready?
Well, don't let me see my flow.
Oh, is that why?
I think that's why I just did that. Okay, let me just.
Just stop.
Okay, everybody ready?
Yeah.
Alright, so let's start on your response to agriculture, right? Like you say we're gonna have 7 million jobs automated, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so how does a sensor automate somebody's job?
First of all, this is text straight from your case. Like your partner read the word automate. That's like one of the verbs
Yeah,
in your
okay,
case.
so we used the wrong word, but I'm
Is that one of the verbs
Okay.
on your cards?
I'll delete that for next round, but here's more important.
No,
here's
no,
more
no.
important.
You can't delete
Okay,
that
this
for
is
this
not
round.
a correct response to my question.
Okay.
How does a sensor automate somebody's
Right,
job?
okay, so there's a lot of things that farmhands do right now, like planting seeds and like...
So farmhands like check the minerals in the dirt. They like
no,
measure
they
the
don't check the minerals in the dirt, but they do check rainfall and they do check a lot of things to do with the weather, and that's just one of the things
No,
that will
they
happen.
don't.
Yeah,
They
do.
grow crops.
Have you ever lived on a farm before?
No, but neither have you. And like
Yes, I have.
Oh, okay.
For the sake of this round, I have.
Sure.
Yeah, but, okay, my point is that there are a lot of jobs that farmhands do that the IoT will replace.
Like,
and, like
what?
I can look into
like
my car and
measuring
give you
rain.
some
Like that's like
examples.
5
Yes.
minutes in their day. Like when it rains. Like that's not
But
replacing
those
somebody's
are,
job.
Those are like specific jobs in agriculture that will be replaced by like IoT.
I can't think of a single agricultural job.
Okay,
Like,
I'll show you the prime evidence right after cross-sex.
I don't need to see it. You can ask the question.
Okay, so you say that like we can use phones to tap into people's conversations right now, right?
Yeah.
Right now, like there are 6 phones on in this room. Can the NSA listen to what we're saying right now?
Yeah. Can I ask you a question?
No, they can't.
Yeah, they can.
How?
Because my phone is on. It's going off right now, and so is yours.
So they can tap into the microphone that's on right now.
Yeah, that's exactly how your IoT thing works, right? Like
yeah,
it's
no,
just
but I'm
as
saying
easy.
this phone, that's not how it works for phones.
That is how it works. But can I ask you a question?
Okay, first of all, neither of us read evidence on this,
Okay.
so I'd say it should be a wash. but-
Okay, sure. We can make it a
Okay.
wash. Okay.
Awesome, so you lose most of the
No, okay. I'm not
responses
gonna
for
make it a wash then.
Wait, okay, so there are 2 things that have changed.
You don't give uniqueness to the IoT. How it's
Alright,
different than my
so-
phone. But like, this is not the time for your like frontlining. Can I ask you a question?
Okay.
Okay, so why are current farmers not using technologies like tractors? Like you said, the practices are locked in, right?
Yeah.
What's
Like, well, tractors are part of the current industrial practices. I know.
like, do farmers in Africa use tractors?
Probably not all of them, no.
No, and they don't. And why is that?
I'd argue that most of the farmers in Africa that don't use tractors are probably subsistence farmers and make food for themselves.
Right. So the biggest barrier is cost, right? And what does the IoT do? It reduces cost. So don't
Oh,
we-
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, but we also said, okay, we would also argue that like sensors are too expensive for them to buy.
Okay, Max literally said in first crossfire they're 15 to 20 cents each.
Max said that?
Yeah, Max said that.
Max shouldn't have said that.
Well, okay. So it's a little late for that
Alright,
now.
if your partner can take back the automate word, we'll take back that cross-X.
All right, you have a question for me?
Yeah. So at the top you say that like we don't need a lot of sensors for the IoT, right?
Yeah.
But how can you just like fiat that there won't be a lot of sensors?
I never said that. I just said it's not unique to computers. It's like the same thing.
Oh, so that's the same as the first part of the overview.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
That's,
There's
good
5
question.
seconds left.
Okay.
Good question.
Okay, we're gonna start running our prep now. We have 2 minutes. Use as much as you need. I think I'm good. Anything you want me to say? Yeah. Okay. Where is that? They said that investor confidence is low because of hacking. They didn't say that.
I don't like this.
They did say that.
Go on.
No, we didn't. Don't respond.
Because in response to that, then why is demand increasing every single year? For IoT by 250%. Yeah. Also change front lines. Yeah. Yeah, but you have to insert automation. Sure. Yeah, you have that. Yeah. Did you hear my crossfire? A sensor doesn't automate somebody's job. Do you need anything else? Oh, also, you have to respond to their environment term. Because they're gonna go for this drop. But they're gonna go for the term. Saying they're gonna go for the term. But I'm saying Alright, that was 117.
43 left.
Everybody ready? Well, let me know. So, we'll start overview and then
You read or he read?
both.
What?
I'm gonna go my overview, then their overview.
Oh, okay.
Overviews, yes. Okay. Everybody ready?
Yeah.
So first of all, I'm always carrying around my phone with me, which has audio and video capabilities, and the government and corporations gain no additional information from the Internet of Things devices. But then, if we win any of our impacts, we win the round because any single one of them outweigh their marginal increase in oppression that they gain in countries which are already oppressing people. But with that, go to their pursuing mandatory backdoors thing. They say pursuing because they're not actually got it yet. Governments can't pass it because it's illegal, that's why they haven't gotten it yet. But then going to 10% of security funding is going to be IoT specific. That's just right now. As we increase the IoT, we're going to be increasing it by 2 times. That's empiric. But then they say only when making calls can cell phones be tapped into. But a microphone is always listening on your phone. It can always be turned on. And when I say, okay, Google on my phone, when it's locked, it will turn on, which means that it's always listening. So then go on to pivot, which says that big data leads to more discrimination, but the only people who can actually discriminate are those few companies that actually make the IoT devices because no one else has access, and they wouldn't give it to them because that would go against their consumers, which would make them not have profit. Then going to the biggest effect on discrimination is going to be inequality, and with that, let's go to the 2 main voting issues. The first is agriculture. They say they won't change fundamental practices, but they will in the 4th industrial revolution, where farming practices will of course change if they find that they can make a ton more money by purchasing 25-cent sensors. But then they say that producing 1.5 times more food won't do anything, but more food means less prices, meaning increased access, and half a billion people died when there's a price hike, meaning this is very important in the round because we're saving lives. Then group the majority of their ridiculous car dump on emissions, where they just drop a ton of things that has nothing to do with the round. Both basically here, you can drop both of our stuff on emissions because no one provides a net impact card at all, which means we are just both doing ridiculous predictions and don't actually know how it's going to affect the environment at all. But then go into their more earthquakes. They say that 80% released with no vulnerabilities, that's security. Those released with vulnerabilities are laptops and cell phones, not the majority of IoT devices. It's not specific. But that means we're accessing the ski floor, which means that they are dirt cheap, and that means we're accessing increasing yield by 70%, decreasing food price 300%. They go to econ, 2016 IoT, they say that they would automate jobs, but then they would never come back. The reason is because they're going to be making money and going to high-skilled positions. Then the OECD card finds that we're going to be reducing poverty by 30%, and for 1% increase in growth means decreasing income inequality by 1%, which according to the FAO is the root cause of authoritarian regimes.
55 seconds is what you said?
I did.
Yeah, okay.
You do have to, yeah. My bad.
Yeah, you're good.
Don't worry.
Actually, we'll talk about this. I'm gonna run out of battery. Okay, is everyone good? So it's gonna go their case, then ours. Just their second contention. And wherever you flow the way, I'll hit that last.
Okay.
It is overview, yeah.
That's fine.
Okay. Actually, let me do 2 seconds. Do you remember what was the site for? Okay, I guess that was you.
Thanks a lot, Bilal. Sorry. Poor time allocation.
You're right. Okay. So, starting on emissions, by the way. Yeah.
Okay, hi.
So, he tries to mitigate all of our offense by basically saying that we don't get a net increase in emissions, right? But the Rose evidence that we read, which is a 20 study meta-analysis, very explicit in saying it offsets the increases and then increases CO2 by 20%, which I guess is net, which then again turns our entire case, because when we get the rebound effect, which is cleanly dropped except by saying that it's not a net increase, it turns all 3 of their impacts. First of all, it destroys agriculture, it makes land unarable, that's rowling. Second of all, it puts 100 million people into poverty, which far outweighs any unquantifiable increase that they try to give you an abstract GDP, but then they also drop automation by except saying that they can go to higher level jobs, but obviously these farmers can't just put on lab suits and walk into a lab, right? They're not educated, they don't have that, which means that 7.1 million people who are pushed out of their jobs because they don't extend the argument about how, like, oh, sensors don't push out jobs. In the summary, it means that those people can't access food because they don't have money to pay for it, which is again a turn to their argument. Even if you don't want to evaluate that, they completely drop the gross turn that says that because of reactionary policy, it limits the amount of industrial research that is created, which means that we can't innovate on industrial research, we can't innovate on agricultural deployment. Insofar as that's true, there's no access, and even then they don't get access to the 2025 projections. Insofar as that's true, they really get nothing, and also, because we increase warming, we also turn the first contention against them. That means more earthquakes, more volcanoes, stuff like that. Let's go to our case. case. First thing that they drop completely is Olson that says that the majority of IoT operates on unencrypted pathways. Definitionally, you need an uninhibited network pathway to function like rapid transfers of information. And so far as that's true, there are arguments about how the corporations banding together really does nothing in the face of mandatory legislation because the Sparapani evidence says that one, governments can force us to. They say this is illegal, but the government literally makes the law. So if that's true, it will be illegal now, but it'll be legal when they decide to do it. But even then, we would contend that they have access to crypto keys. That's in the rebuttal. It says specifically we can just do our own surveillance. The government can do it themselves. Even then, that gives us access to the IDG evidence that says there's a 13% increase in useful and unique data by 2020. That's the bright line. We say that there's more data gained through the IoT, 13% more. They try to say that we mitigate a lot of this through like the 87% number and like phones, but insofar as that's true, Richard's evidence says that we make this physical, and that gives us at least a 13% increase. Insofar as, they also try to make this pet argument that says that like there's going to be laws made, but we'd say like that's before Trump presidency and the alt-right populist movement. Insofar as that's true, they have no incentive to make laws that limit surveillance because they think that like surveillance is necessary. Insofar as that's true, you give us Richardson and Kumar that says that any expansion of the surveillance state will be racist. Goldstein that says this happens in developing countries. Beckett that says that this is the suppression of minorities, and Nemi that says you have to reject every single instance of racism, otherwise it justifies living in a world of constant oppression. Vote for any non-uniqueness, even if it is a marginal increase. That was their case.
Okay, we're gonna talk about missions.
Yeah.
Ready?
Yeah.
Can we see that net emissions card?
Yeah. It says it offsets, but yeah.
Can I see
We just
just
wanna
the-
see it.
Yeah.
Sure.
If not, prep. Catch it.
Oh yeah.
Prep Steelers.
That was a good one, Bruce. Do you highlight it?
I mean,
What?
Just look up 20% or offset or the other.
God.
What?
We'll start with-
Just look up offset. It's on the same page.
alright.
I just hit escape. By
Hold on.
accident.
Let me, yeah.
All right.
I can
There's
come over.
it says offset 20 times.
Yeah, like, could you just show
Oh,
me
really?
what
Yes.
Okay. I searched for it and I got on the first try, so. This is one example, but it only says partly. But
I just
if
see
you
the-
keep going, then it says offsetting rebound effects must be explicitly.
You guys
entered.
you prep for this, right? It says What? 50 you prep for this?
Yeah,
what-
okay, so you
we'll
can-
start prep and
So,
we'll-
so this
sit
part
down,
talks about
yeah,
how
it's fine.
any offsetting is explicitly built into the model, and then in the end it says there's a 20% increase. So
Okay,
if that
we'll
that
start-
explains it,
We'll start
43 seconds starting now.
and then in the conclusion that's where it's 20%.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're good. That was 9 seconds.
Yeah, that was 10 seconds.
I'm not going to ask.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Everybody ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not going to say much.
So at any point in that study that you showed me, does it say the Internet of Things?
I mean, no.
No.
Okay, so then how does it relate to the round
It's
at
the
all?
warrant that we read before from Brian.
Okay, and our evidence,
Yeah.
actually,
Our
the thing is
evidence
that David
is
lied about our
specific.
evidence, right? It actually is on net. We just didn't want to engage in the environmental argument,
yeah,
right?
that's
Yeah.
true.
Okay, so if your argument is on that, and our argument is on that.
But
It's
yours
not
is
on net. Ours is specific
It
to
is.
the IoT.
Ours says
It says that data centers are bad right now, and we curb the emissions from data centers by increasing efficiency,
Yeah.
right? It's like
Wait,
one
wait,
step
what
further.
part do you read on a net?
I think it's the carbon war room or
Yeah,
something
that's
like
what it
that.
Sure, sure. So we can talk about that now. I guess it's a little bit late. First
I mean,
of all,
your
it's not
study
net.
has
It says that
nothing
it
to
has
do
the
with the
full
IoT.
potential to reduce 9.1 gigatons of CO2. Second of all, it definitely isn't inclusive of the rebound
So then
effect.
this
It
goes-
says the
wait, wait.
immediate reduction.
So then wait,
Obviously, the rebound effect
And then
happens
both,
to
wait,
the
so then
immediate
both of us,
afterwards.
so then this goes back to exactly what I said in summary, that you should just drop both of them because
Why?
none of them
This is
are
like
actually
just
very accurate.
uneducational
No.
debate.
Yeah, like we're just,
You're just-
we're just,
Okay,
like I can
okay,
show
okay.
like you a bunch of predictions about how the economy's gonna improve. You can show me a bunch of how
It's
they're
not
gonna
as-
negate,
it's
and you
not
don't actually show like
as
any
you make it
like
out to be,
net
right?
impact here from the IoT. No one knows what's gonna happen.
So it's not
There are
as
good
complicated
warrants.
as you
There
make it
are
out to
good
be, right?
warrants for
Your
both
carbon
arguments.
warrant
there.
evidence says
Look,
that the
look.
immediate reduction would be 9.1 gigatons.
I'm saying-
our Rose evidence, which
Okay.
is a 20-study meta-analysis, is really
Your
good.
Rose
It's
evidence
from the
has-
status quo.
And it's nothing to do with the IoT.
wait. If
You're
I
making
can
your own
explain,
assertion
right?
that you access all of this like climate change problem, which
Wait,
you don't.
Yes, people access like earthquakes or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
energy efficiency, right? That's like built into your case. And we read the prime evidence, and you also concede that, and that links into the rebound effect, which happens after the median
Look,
reduction. It's a rebound. because
Your
once it
rebound
goes
effect.
down,
Wait,
it
wait,
goes
hold
up
on.
again.
The problem with your
It's that
study,
simple.
the problem with your study is because it doesn't look at the IoT, which inherently makes all the current technology that is very inefficient more efficient, which is why it finds that on
The
net we
whole
would
argument
probably
is
have a
that once
reduction
it
in
becomes
CO2.
more efficient,
Wait.
then farmers will say, hey, I can spend the same amount and produce more. Or factories can say, I can emit more with the same amount of
So
money. It's
if
the
they're
case
doing
warrant
that-
was extended in the
Wait,
speech.
so if they're doing that, right, and if they're using the same amount of land and having a 70% increase in yield and decreasing food prices by 300%, are you conceding agriculture?
What do you mean?
Like you're saying that like farmers are gonna like see that their technology is really efficient and expand their farm.
We read automation, which we sort of.
I responded to automation.
Yeah, David responded to automation, and so did I in Crossfire.
Yeah, I responded back to it, and your Crossfire response wasn't in the summary.
Okay, come on.
Even
Like,
that- even
it's
that-
factually
even
true.
that
Wait, it's
Also,
factually true that a
response-
sensor doesn't replace a job.
Yeah.
Like, why does that have to be in the
Also,
summary?
Sure. So here's what I would say, right? If you make things more efficient and you make the water, for example, drip irrigation, which is a huge part of IoT, that is definitely going to displace jobs. But even if you don't buy the automation side, right, we're still saying that arable land goes away in the long term if we win warming.
Overall,
But you don't win warming.
Hold on. Overall,
Why
though,
not?
overall, you don't respond to any of our econ statistics, which finds that when you increase the GDP, you decrease poverty, you decrease income inequality, which means that we are right on jobs.
Right.
That even though they're being
I
displaced,
agree,
you create
but,
more
like,
jobs and more income goes up,
increasing
which it doesn't matter. Wait, hold on. Wait.
You don't respond to reactionary.
Wait. First of all, your reactionary policy was just a huge card dump that had nothing to do with the round. It was like steward burden on firms. Firms has nothing to do with the fact that farmers are buying cheap
No, that's
sensors.
who's deploying the tech.
We have like 30 seconds left. We'll start around 34. We'll use all 34. Okay, that's okay. Their case. All right. Starting on their case. Everybody ready? Starting in their case, a lot of important unaddressed responses, first of which is they can only prove a marginal increase in the impact, right? Like Max specifically says 13%. The biggest problem with that is that the impact is already at 87%. Why have we not seen any impacts manifest? That's a response that goes dropped. But the other response that goes dropped is the IoT significantly increases metadata, which makes it harder to find a needle in a haystack. This becomes problematic because it's harder to use the data. But third and most importantly, the biggest response is that we have the non-uniqueness from cell phones, which means the vast majority of their impact already gets access, and the fact that this data is completely useless under the IoT, which means you're not getting an increase or decrease in personal privacy. Then, on the environment, no one can really prove anything. Both of our evidences are generally on net. Ours is IoT specific, theirs is not. We would argue that theirs is in the status quo and you should drop both of us because this is really an uneducational debate that we shouldn't be having. With that in mind, let's go to our case. There are two distinct ways to vote for us. The first of which is agriculture, which is the clearest voter. Low cost is very critically clear because Max tells you in first Crossfire these sensors only cost 15 to 20 cents, which is very affordable for these farmers that don't need 1 million or like 3,000 of them. It makes no sense what he's saying. But more importantly, lack of adoption currently is mostly due to the fact that farming technology right now is exceedingly prohibitively expensive. Like a tractor, no third world farmer can afford that. When you have 25 cent sensors, that means in the long term, adoption will increase. That is a definite truth. But more importantly, they respond with automation. First of all, we don't have the response in summary, right? That like the fact that sensors don't automate jobs, this is like a factual truth, right? Like it's just true. But second, David also tells you that in the long term, we see the replacement with more high-skill jobs, which is also true. I'm going to get to that under economics. This leads us to the 70% increase in yields and 300% reduction in the fact that we see high fruit prices, saving 500 million lives. This solves the biggest problem right now, which is distribution, which fundamentally means we have better economics on the idea of farming. But second, on the idea of economics, the only response we get is consumer confidence, which is ultimately mitigation. The more important thing is that economic growth is overall definitely going to happen. We say there's going to be a huge trend here with $14 trillion leading to a 30% reduction in poverty, and therefore a 1% increase in the growth decreases poverty by 1%. The weighing is pretty clear on their a priori analysis. Economic mobility has the biggest by far link into inequality. When you lift 30% of the population out of poverty and millions of small farmers, you link into this. Sure, people are oppressed across the world, but for every one person oppressed, 100 more die of starvation. So vote for the affirmative.
Where are you going?
Their case, and then I'm going to go to our case.
Okay.
Is it okay if I take half a second of prep time?
No.
You don't have any-
No. No.
That was your decision.
Okay. It's actually Max's decision. Okay.
No, you prep for the wrong.
Yeah, fine.
You did the last round.
Dude, shut up.
Frontline our responses.
Just start your phone and stop prepping.
Yeah, you're stealing prep right now.
Like,
He's
I'm
thinking
not
about the final
prepping.
focus.
Yeah.
Secret points.
Just start.
All of you, go. Okay. On their contention too about innovation, specifically on the economy, they do not respond to the gross terminal defense in their summary speech. We tell you that gross is explained that cyber threats will make the government reactively limit the advancement of new technology. Stewart furthers that this creates a cost burden on firms, stifling innovation. There are two implications of this. First of all, their economic impacts don't happen because it is these rich firms that will be carrying out these economic impacts in the first place. But second of all, the agricultural impacts don't happen because sensors don't become this cheap unless firms can innovate and create the demand for those products. But second, they just drop the they don't drop the feature term, but the extend the feature term, the size of the automation goes up to 7.1 million jobs are pushed out. The only thing he says is that people can go to more high-level jobs, but they don't respond to Max's response in the summary. They can't go to these high-level jobs. But finally, on the environment, we tell you that IoT fixtures will reduce the cost of energy emissions undeniably. This is not disputed. This gives us the Rose evidence, which is only responded to in the grand cross-examination, was dropped in the summary, which tells us that an increase in fuel efficiency stimulates demand for energy, offsetting the initial greenhouse gas reductions and increases in CO2 emissions by 20%. There may be a temporary decrease in emissions, but immediately after emissions goes up by 20%. They're trying to muddle this, but that's because they're losing the argument. It's a 20-study meta-analysis. This gives us the rallying evidence from 2015, which tells us that global warming will push an additional 100 million people into poverty and destroy the world economy, which is heavily dependent on climate stability. This will make sense right after. We outweigh econ and agriculture on scope again, but now go to our case. So the first thing he says is that we already have phones, but Neil Rich of the Harvard Law Review writes that over the next 15 years, the Internet of Things will increasingly build into our appliances, homes, and infrastructure much more than just phones. First, they literally read no cards on this. This is all analysis, so err on the side of evidence. But second, he said, okay, Google in his summary, and his phone didn't turn on. Then he says that backdoors are illegal, but Tim Sparagani informed writes that countries such as the US, China, and Russia pursue backdoors. Government surveillance capabilities increase at an alarming rate. Countries are already pursuing backdoors right now. This gives us the many evidence that says we must reject every instance of racism. No life is worth living if some lives are valued over others. They never contest this weighing on its face. Institutional racism is a systemic impact that happens every second of every day. If we keep surveilling African Americans at disproportionate rates, we normalize racism to the point where we start to ignore it like they have in this round. This comes from the Beckett evidence that says that any increase in the surveillance state will increase disproportionate surveillance of minorities. And for these reasons, I strongly urge you to vote for the con.
Okay, Google.
Can I see Prime?